Okay. Hi, everyone. And thank you for joining, for making the time to be here. My name is Priya Joshi, and Srijata, who is in that Foodwise window, and I are, yeah, that's the one. And I are the co-founders of Foodwise, and we are here together with Chaitali, as also with Alice, who is from the University of Gastronomic Sciences of Polenzo in Italy. Just a few words of introduction from some of us, as we really get into the subject for today's webinar. This is the first webinar in a series of 6 that we are doing over this week and next week. And as such, of course, like all of our webinars, this webinar too is open to everyone. But in particular, each of these 6 webinars has really been structured and has been scheduled as part of what we call STHIRA, which is a sustainable food innovation challenge for university students in India. By university students, we mean students who are at present studying in a diploma program, in a bachelor's program, in a master's program, or may even be PhD students. This is a collaborative program, STHIRA, between us, Foodwise, we are based here in India, and the University of Gastronomic Sciences of Italy, the world's first and a very special interdisciplinary university for food studies. And this is our second edition. So this is the second time that we are doing STHIRA. So for those of you that are students, this is really intended to give you a good understanding, some food for thought, some inspiration for this theme. For those of you that are not students, undoubtedly this will be great learning, and hopefully you will encourage any students in your families, in your surroundings to participate as well. I'm just going to do just a really very short introduction to STHIRA. It is an innovation challenge for students, so we are running it over the next 2 to 3 months. And the purpose really of STHIRA is to engage students, young people in our country to participate in a learning experience, in a discourse, in an innovation exercise to try and identify, creative, bold ideas for the problems that plague the sustainability of food systems in the future, really the future of food in some sense. We have 6 really interesting deep themes this year, of which this is one, revival of indigenous food ingredients. And the dates really just very quickly are until the end of June, students can register. We'll have a shortlisting process that then takes us to a semi-final round sometime in the middle of August, and then we have further shortlisting, which takes us to a finale, which we will host to be an in-person event in Bangalore, which is where we are based. We'll spend perhaps a little bit of time on this towards the very end. Chaitali will talk about how we are going to evaluate any ideas that emerge from the challenge. But perhaps it's valuable for me to say upfront that in addition to this being a really interesting learning experience, it is, like any good innovation challenge, it is also accompanied by some really interesting benefits and prizes for student teams. There are cash prizes for the most promising ideas. There are some incentives for those that choose to apply for further education at the university in Italy. And also there are some incubation opportunities for teams that would like to convert their ideas into business ventures. IIM Bangalore's NSR cell is our ecosystem partner this year. So it's just a really, exciting experience, and there is none of its kind absolutely anywhere else in the world, at least at this point of time. So we hope and we look forward to many student teams participating from around the country. Just very quickly, these are the 6 themes of this year: revival of indigenous food ingredients, localization of food systems, reduce food waste, shape urban food futures, which is how can we have more food spaces in our cities, which are, increasingly crowded, very heavily urbanized as well, as we know. How can we reimagine food systems through creative practice, through art, basically? And then the last theme is that, in an age where we are pretty much leading our lives based on what phones and gadgets are telling us, how can we still retain and perhaps revive some of our generational inherent wisdom towards food and health? Today's webinar, as you know, is focused on indigenous food ingredients. And I'm going to just, introduce our two speakers for today. We have Dr. Naji Suleiman, who is Assistant Professor of Environmental and Applied Botany at the University of Gastronomic Sciences. And his research, amongst other things, has actually been heavily focused on ethnobotanical practices in regions which are affected by conflict, and particularly, how wild plants and indigenous ingredients can play a role during emergencies. So very highly specialized, very critical as well. He's going to introduce really the subject soon after I do, and our main speaker for today, who's really going to focus on most of the talk, is Dr. Gurmeet Singh. Gurmeet is the Dean of Research and Outreach at the Transdisciplinary University of Health Sciences here in Bangalore. And Gurmeet and his team and his colleagues at TDU are really doing quite a lot of research and innovation work, which is at the intersection of traditional health, indigenous ingredients, modern problems of nutrition, biodiversity, community health. I mean, there is just so much, which we unfortunately will not have the time to discuss it today. So, he's incredibly well positioned to talk about what indigenous food ingredients are and what their revival really means and what its value is. Before we, get into the subject, I'm going to ask Alice just to spend a couple of minutes introducing all of you to the University of Gastronomic Sciences. Perhaps some or many of you have heard of it, but perhaps you have not. So important to know, who our partner and really sponsor is in this effort. Alice, over to you.
Thank you so much, Priya. Good evening to everyone who's following us from India. Thank you for joining. My name is Alice Tondella. I'm part of the board of directors of the University of Gastronomic Sciences, which is up to now the first and the only university who is totally focused on the study of food sciences and food studies. We are based in Italy. We were born 20 years ago. Promoted by the Slow Food Movement Organization, which is a global movement also present in India, in some parts of India, that promotes the access to good food, clean food, so that does not harm the environment, and fair food, so that promote the right of the people that work within the different steps of the food value chain. And we are a very international university. 40% of our student body is international. So that's why we are very keen on organizing and promoting this STHIRA challenge together with Priya, who is a former student of the university, and with all of the Foodwise team. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alice. Dr. Naji, I will turn over to you with no further ado.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm very glad to take part in this presentation and to co-present with Dr. Gurmeet, and thank you to STHIRA, and I wish good luck for the students who could come with some creative ideas. I will share the presentation and then I can probably start. Just 1 second. So is it fine? Can you see the presentation now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for the introduction also, Priya. And my name is, again, my name is Naji Suleiman. I'm Assistant Professor of Environmental and Applied Botany at the University of Gastronomic Sciences in Polenzo. Specialized, as you mentioned, in ethnobotany and ethnobiology, doing mainly ethnobotanical studies around Mediterranean and Middle East and some Southern Asian countries, but let's say mainly active in Mediterranean area, focusing on traditional knowledge, traditional food, uh, interaction between people and plants, and the sociocultural importance of plants, and so on. So, in this presentation, I will provide an introduction of reviving indigenous food ingredients, and I think later, like Dr. Gourmet will, let's say, go deeply inside the topic to guide the students who could come with some ideas. If we start like just with a definition of indigenous food ingredients, even if it's somehow, let's say, well-known term, but we can just go quickly through this. Indigenous food ingredients are those ingredients that originate from and are traditionally used by indigenous people of a particular region. These foods are closely related to the cultural, to the spiritual, to the ecological practices of indigenous communities, and they are much associated with the traditional ecological knowledge, how people they use these ingredients and how they used to use it over centuries and millennia. And these ingredients often reflect sustainable harvesting methods and deep knowledge of local ecosystem. The question here, why we are presenting about this, why it matters, why we have to revive these indigenous ingredients. Firstly, because they have a deep roots in local culture and biodiversity. They carry centuries of traditions, of identity, of local ecological knowledge, of this the knowledge that was transferred from a generation to another over hundreds of years. It has resilience to climate change and environmental stress because these ingredients, these, let's say, plants, they are adapted already to local conditions. They are resistant to some certain pests and diseases. They are spread or let's say exist in the region of the ingredients. They are drought tolerant. Sometimes could be tolerant also to low temperature or to the other like unfavorable environmental conditions. And also they require low agricultural inputs. Those ingredients, they are often more nutritious, sustainable than commercial crops because they are locally produced. They are already they have the taste of the place. They are diverse. Usually they are more diverse than commercial crops. So there is a diversity of nutrients or nutrients intake for human body in terms of fiber or vitamins or minerals, and also require, let's say, less resources to grow or to cultivate. These also indigenous food ingredients, they have some kind of, uh, they act as kind of resistance act uh, against, let's say, globalization and the modernization of food nowadays, and also agriculture by, like, let's say, replaced by commercial monoculture and leading to biodiversity and knowledge loss, which is like this is, let's say, a main concern in recent decades of the sustainability issue, and this is the biodiversity loss in general. So reviving here indigenous ingredients doesn't, or let's say it goes beyond just reviving the ingredients themselves, but it means regenerating ecosystem, cultures, and communities because all these elements are associated and closely linked with ecosystems and cultures and the communities which they are using them. So since we are talking about food ingredients, we have to talk about gastronomy, gastronomy as a lens of revival. Gastronomy, it also goes beyond the taste, beyond just consumption. Food as a culture, memory, and identity. It's a cultural act and shaped by memory, by the experience of people, by the rituals, by the, let's say, the social importance of food and the place. All these elements and factors somehow contribute to the gastronomy and to food. Also, indigenous ingredients carry traditional knowledge because it holds the stories and the stories of resilience, healing, or adaptation, and how these food ingredients were used and how they were, let's say, some ingredients were and are still crucial in food security and food sovereignty for local communities. And also revival through taste, story, and community engagement by involving community and bringing these traditions back to life. Because if we, and this is already proved through the studies that we conduct and other researchers are conducting, let's say in the past decades, we notice this the fading of knowledge and use of indigenous food on the cost of just the modern, what's so-called the modern food and the modern ingredients and the commercial ones, which we can find it usually nowadays, for example, here in Europe in the large supermarket chains and so on. So, as I mentioned, that gastronomy is just, it's not about flavor, it's a form of cultural regeneration. What does revival mean since we are talking, if we go a little bit deeper in revival? Revival, it goes to regenerate the ecosystem. It's about restoring ecosystems, not just bringing food back to market. Because to produce this food, we need again to revive the ecosystem linked to this food, to care about again about the local landscape and the local needs and the local knowledge related to the production of this food. So it's something connected firstly from production, from ecosystem, and then it goes through the producers, through as we can see here, connecting again with chefs, with consumers, until it reach to consumers at the end. So revival of indigenous food products somehow involve revival of many other factors related to this process. And also the ethical sourcing and fair value chain to, let's say, prioritize fair sourcing and local value chain and community benefit. So revival here is not only about nostalgia, it's not something just we want to bring something that we used or we feel that we missed and we want to bring it back because it connects something to the childhood or to the past or to our grandparents. It's a consciousness or conscious collective act of renewal related to the nature, related to the consumption, related to the sustainability, related to all these factors. If I can give some, let's say, framework or ideas for probably student who wants to suggest some ideas, they have to consider firstly to uncover these stories, to discover these stories behind regional ingredients. They have to look around them in their areas, in their regions, let's say, to explore the local ingredients, to see which local ingredients they are fading, they are disappearing, they are neglected, they are underutilized nowadays, to explore their culture and ecological significance. So it's not only about just to highlight food ingredients, it's also to study and to highlight and to express and to bring into the light the sociocultural and ecological and environmental significance of these food ingredients. and also to link food to broader, let's say, thematic issues like ecology, health, and identity. As we know, like food obviously is connected to health, is connected to the ecology and sustainability, and also it's connected to the identity because when we express our identity, one main element comes to express is food. Food, besides other things, form what we can call human identity, or even like human group identity. And also to design to craft innovative experience or products that celebrate and elevate these ingredients, and to create tangible benefits for local communities and promoting equity and sustainability. There are, let's say, numerous examples from around the world about um, indigenous food ingredients that were somehow revived and they are nowadays in this, let's say, cycle of production and consumption. For example, we can see, for example, like Digitaria exodus, or what's called like fonio in western part of Africa. It was once forgotten, but now revived as a climate resilient grain and offering a sustainable alternative for food security in some parts of Africa. In India, since we are talking here, and this is presentation mainly directed to the students in India, there is also the case of millets, which were reintegrated into diets through innovative policies and gastronomy and promoting health and sustainability. The same we can see with amaranth. So there is many examples. We can find also many studies about this in South America, about some local ingredients, about some local varieties, even of some well-known, let's say, fruits or vegetables, for example, of what we have nowadays in market here in Europe, one kind or two kinds or two varieties of banana. But if you go to South America, you can find like tens or even hundreds of these varieties. So reviving this again, re-emerging in urban diets and introducing them again to the diet, documenting their knowledge, depending on them as a source of nutrients and as a sustainable way of producing food. So if now can say something also what a student can do now, what can you do? These who are watching now the webinar or who will watch it later, as I know that it may be uploaded in YouTube or some platform. So firstly, to document these disappearing ingredients. This is already proved in many studies that the fading and disappearing of indigenous food ingredients and even the knowledge related to plants and to ingredients in general and traditional food, it's even disappearing faster than the disappearance of some plants on our planet. Because if we look in a matter of 3 decades, there is a huge disconnection from local ingredients and from traditional knowledge. This is much faster what we are already losing from this, what we mentioned, the biodiversity loss. So it's very important to preserve, to document this knowledge because this knowledge is disappearing. This is already orally exist. So in let's say in 1-2 generation, we are losing a knowledge that was accumulated over hundreds and over thousands of years, a human experience, and this it has to be valued and it has to be documented, it has to be preserved. Secondly, also to design research that highlight the sociocultural and ecological value of these ingredients is not only to document and to say about these ingredients, but also to go deeply to see how these food ingredients are used in the context of the society, of the group. Is it connected to the rituals? Is it connected to some festivals? Is it what's this, like, let's say, the social and cultural importance of these products? And also to design food products, educational kits and also to or impactful campaigns that spark change. And also to collaborate with indigenous and rural communities, because any change at the end, just we don't want to say something theoretical, any change at the end without being reflected to the local communities and without working with the local communities rather than on the local communities. This is very important aspect in general in research and in the, let's say, studies oriented to some what's so-called rural development context. So this is very important to work with the local communities and to see how uh, our studies can somehow resonate in their practices. Why this matters now, this reviving food ingredients at this time, firstly because of the ecological and cultural collapse that we can observe in many parts of the world nowadays. Our food systems are at some critical point now, with both ecological degradation and cultural loss threatening our future. We are being somehow homogenized with one culture, one food culture, ideas. This the globalization is somehow affecting our behavior towards everything, including food. And also, it matters now because of the youth-led innovation. Young people hold the power, and you, the students who will watch this, who are willing to suggest something, they hold the power to reimagine food systems, to create some solutions related. We start from the regions, from the person where he exists, from the regional and national, and then probably extra-national or international levels to create solutions that are sustainable and inclusive. And as I probably mentioned during the presentation, that revival of these ingredients is kind of resistance practice, because like to revive this traditional food and practices to somehow save and preserve and to renew the cultural heritage in the face of the global challenges. So let food become the revolution that reconnects us to our roots, to our communities, and our future. Food is obviously very important lens that we can look at the world around us through it. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Naji. I think, Srijata, I think if you made Gurmeet the co-host, Gurmeet, if you're using any slides, we'll let you share.
Yeah. Can you all see my slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So yeah, hi everyone, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this forum. I'll share a few ideas, few thoughts, some of the work we've been doing on this. Anyone who wants to reach me, my email hopefully it's not getting visible. Yeah, maybe another click. Yep. So my email is there, so you can reach out to me if you have any questions, right? Okay, so first of all, I think I just wanted to begin in saying why are we talking about food even before we get to indigenous food ingredients, right? And the three big reasons, at least in our lab, that we look at, and probably globally as well, everybody's talking about these three big challenges, global challenges. That's human health, our own health, the planet's health, the environment, the biodiversity it harbors, and the societal health, which is the livelihoods of people. And food has a disproportionately high impact on all these three dimensions of health. And therefore, food has become, over the last 10, 15 years, center of plate, so to say, right, in these discussions, because our food choices offer a lever that can simultaneously address all the three dimensions, right? And therefore, thinking about our food choices has become a very important thing, and which is why probably all of you are interested in STHIRA 2025 as well, right? So our lab looks at what we call as therefore food first solutions, right, to holistic health. And we call the whole program as Food Futures, right? So when we think about this. Where do you start is a big question, right? Where do you get these ideas uh, for uh, for food futures, or what we should eat, for food choices, which may tick all the three boxes? And there can be many starting points, right? Uh, the green revolution, or looking at breeding technologies for a few plants which are amenable to them, and coupling them with fertilizer technologies and deep well boring technologies, irrigation technologies, was one very big idea and proved very successful to bring the cost of food down and make sure there are no great famines happening around the world. Of course, it has some limitations. And what has also happened is that that's been the only big idea and has not been balanced with multiple other ideas, right? And so, what we are looking at is probably not saying that is bad, right? But we are looking at what are the other ideas that should coexist with these big mega ideas, right? And for our university, our program, in my research program in particular, I look at this phrase called local ecosystem resources and the associated traditional knowledge as a starting point for ticking the three boxes of health. And I think today's, when we look at indigenous food ingredients, probably we are saying the same thing: local ecosystem resources and indigenous food ingredients, and right. And so the challenge, of course, is how do you translate some of these things, ideas, concepts on indigenous food ingredients and traditional knowledge associated with them into addressing today's challenges, right? And you require innovative products and services to be able to do that. And there are three thinkings that we feel that we need to become masters of when we go on to this innovation path. And those are the systems thinking that appeared a lot in Priya's slides as well, the food systems thinking, which is essentially a thinking which connects food with ecology, right, with our environment, and the whole circularity, right, from growing it to the waste and the circularity around it. The second thinking is the well-being thinking, which is everybody talks about food and nutrition. We all look at how many grams of protein my daily diet should have, how many calories it should have, how much of salt is the maximum amount of salt, how many milligrams of iron, etc. Right? That's nutrition today. And what we all realize is that there are multiple choices, hundreds of choices of proteins and iron and vitamins that we could select from. And therefore, which ones to select for ourselves is a big question, because the impact of our choices, which iron source do I select, will have an impact not just on plate and nutrition today, but 20 years from now, it's the food, the well-being thinking is the connection between food and biology. And the third part, the thinking hat that all of you looking at innovation need to wear, is the design thinking, right? Which connects the food to the consumer. And that is looking at from the consumer need to the consumer delight, because food is a thing that, while all of us want to be healthy and save the planet and make sure everybody is happy and has a good livelihood, but our final choice is dictated by how tasty is it, what's the texture, right? And therefore, the design thinking cannot be ignored. Is actually probably one of the primary things that we need to think of when we launch on this innovation journey. So now the question, coming to reviving indigenous food ingredients and building the case, I'll focus a little bit on forgotten foods and wild edibles in this, and maybe a couple of slides, then making it general towards the end. But the three big questions is why indigenous ingredients, what are indigenous ingredients, and where do I find these, right? So let's just take a couple of slides for each, right? The first, why, right? And of course, simplest explanation that I look at when we talk about why here is that from our own health perspective, right? We now do realize over the last 10, 15 years of gut microbiome project that our health is dictated by the number of different species, or the diversity of species residing in our gut, right? So, okay, that's a nice parameter. How do I increase the number of species in my gut? Well, for that, I need to have diversity on my food plate, right? Okay. So I need to have many more ingredients in my diet. There are scientists who are beginning to say at least 30 different plants all of us should consume on a weekly basis to be healthy, right? So where do I get this diversity on the plate? For that, we require diversity of socio-ecological food systems, right? So the number of different ecosystems from which the food are coming rather than one homogeneous food ecosystem that feeds us. And therefore, this of healthy lives with healthy kitchens coming from, right? So that becomes a one reason. And if you look at what is happening to our food over the last 50 years or so, and this chart is probably a popular chart coming from FAO, right, data, which says that, hey, 75% of all global food now comes from 12 plants, 5 animal species, just 3 species, rice, maize, wheat, make up 60% of our calories around the world, etc. So we seem to be actually on a journey to minimize diversity, right? And which is why this wake-up call that, hey, how do we balance the two? While these will always remain dominant because we have kind of cracked the code to be able to produce them very efficiently at minimal land at least levels, but maybe greenhouse gases, etc. We fertilizer use, pesticide use. There are other big challenges which happen when we go to these monstrous levels of these few food items, food ingredients. So the question is, how do we balance, and are there alternates that we should be focusing on as well? And that's the focus of this, right? And therefore, the first thing which we start learning from when we start looking at these individual foods, because the question of diversity. If you talk to a nutritionist or most scientists, they will start getting into food group diversity. Hey, these are the 10 food groups, and we are hoping you are having some cereals, some pulses, some dairy, some milk, some nuts and seeds, etc. What this chart is saying is there are 3 properties, and these are our traditional knowledge properties of kapha, pitta, vata, which Ayurveda says that, hey, there are many ingredients which seem to have opposite properties within the same food group. So there are cereals which may increase all these VPK properties, and there are cereals which may reduce it, pulses which may increase and reduce. So we can't really think of diversity in terms of food group alone. We have to actually go to individual ingredients, right? That's one, right? So so that is kind of like why we need to look at indigenous ingredients, right? Because they will build diversity in our diet and connect the whole ecosystem with it and preserve ecosystem diversity. Now, what are indigenous ingredients, right, is another key question. Because, if I look at my diet, probably 80-90% of my diet is all indigenous ingredients. Rice originated in India, right, about 10,000 years ago. If you look at wheat, 7,000, 8,000 years when it came. Most millets actually are more recent than wheat and rice, right? Many people will think of tea being an alien product. I don't know, anybody thinks tea is indigenous or non-indigenous? Anybody would like to open and answer? Do you think is tea indigenous?
I thought tea was non-indigenous.
And why do you think so?
Because I've heard somewhere that it came from China.
It came from China. And what about ragi? You think that's indigenous?
No clue.
No clue, right?
I don't know.
I
Yeah.
would have thought that ragi is indigenous. I mean, I happen to know tea is not Gurmeet only because I've heard you talk about it before.
Yeah. So, I think if you look at ragi came from Africa, probably. Most of the millets actually came out of the 30 millets, probably only 2 or 3 are really indigenous to India. Most of them came from outside. And as I said, rice and wheat have probably a longer history in India than most millets, right? And tea, if you look at, came to India about 3,000 years ago. The domestication event of plants is how scientists look at plants, that when did some wild variety become domesticated. So the first domestication event for tea is about 20,000 years ago, way before the Ice Age, happened in China. Actually, sorry, 40,000 years ago. And 20,000 years ago is when it split into 2 domestic lines, one the Chinery line and the other the Assamika line. And then about 3,000 years ago, the Assamika line split into two. One is the Chinese Assamika line, the other is the Indian Assamika line, across the two slopes of the Himalayas, which divide the two countries. So is 3,000 years long enough to call indigenous, or do we still call it a foreign? Right, is a question you have to ask, right? Because when does something become indigenous, right? 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, right? So I think when I look at tea, number one, I think tea is indigenous, right? Because 3,000 years is a long enough time to consider. And certainly the way we make tea, right? Which is adding milk to it, for example. That is something which has come from our traditional knowledge systems where we extract things in milk and give a lot of botanicals, like the recipes in Ayurveda, in Siddha, etc., which are very similar to these recipes that we have of making infusions of botanicals in milk, right? It's very and boiling it, right? Not just a infusion, but boiling it in milk, right? And to extract is a very indigenous, right? You would think. Similarly, adding spices to that, what we call as masala chai, again is a 3,000-year-old recipe documented of botanicals being extracted and number of spices added to it to mask bitterness, to other things, right? And if you look at the other big way is the Kashmiri kahwa, for example, right? Which is that you have tea and you have a lot of some 10, 11 spices added to it, and you boil it and you take the decoction and drink. Again, recipes of such decoctions, there are hundreds of such recipes documented in Ayurveda. So is it the ingredient which has to be indigenous, or the method, the practice of making that you have to be indigenous? So you'll have to toy with these ideas when you get into this topic of indigenous ingredients, because I'm also looking at always indigenous ingredient or indigenous way of making newer ingredients, because many times those indigenous methods have secrets in them which make food nutritious, healthy, etc., right? While it may not have served the purpose of a species prevention, but it may be good for nutrition and other aspects, right? So, well, in India, we've actually been dealing with a number of plant species for both medicinal and food values. About 6,500 is what our university has documented, right? I think what was a very nice last slide in the previous presentation, the 4 aspects that document these indigenous ingredients, build narratives around them, convert them into foods, and then convert those into community kind of products, right? How do you actually democratize them? So I think our university has been at it. Anybody interested on the methods to do while documentation, because there has to be a documentation methodology. You don't need to reinvent it. Please come to us, contact us. We've documented some food ingredients over the last year from about 30 classical texts spanning 3,000 years of food knowledge in India. And we have probably India's largest library of food ingredients, both modern and traditional ingredients, right? And India specific. NIN, if you look at the National Institute of Nutrition's Indian food composition tables, has about 542 ingredients. And you can look at that probably as what 99% of India is eating today, right? And the other two are from Ayurveda and FSSAI, and you can see a lot of ingredients there if you understand Venn diagrams, which are not there in the NIN. And so bring in a lot of novel ingredients that you could consider as indigenous and forgotten, right? Well, they're not absolutely forgotten because some community or the other is always using them, but most of us are unaware of them, and there may be a lot of ideas. At least our university is tapping many of these ideas for foods. And what is interesting from a food perspective is that they bring in a lot of diversity of phytonutrients way beyond the nutrients that we talk of in terms of macro and micronutrients. We consume about 30,000-40,000 different molecules, right? Beyond these. Is there a issue? Suddenly something seems to have disappeared.
No, we can still hear you and see your slides, Guru.
You can see my slide, huh?
Yeah.
Something has popped up on my screen. Okay. Yeah.
Is it from us?
Yeah. No, that's okay. So yeah, what's interesting from a food perspective is that they bring a lot of different in-mouth experiences, sour, sweet, salt, pungent, bitter, astringent, stinging, right, notes, and therefore it increases the library of ingredients from which you can craft interesting food products. You know, if you're looking at culinary part of it. So the next question, of course, is where do I find these ingredients, right? And this is important. I mean, this is a chart from a modern ingredients, and what it is showing is the greenhouse footprint, the carbon footprint of various protein-rich foods, right? But what you will see is that so the x-axis is the carbon footprint. You can see 10, 20, 30, right? Greenhouse gases per 100 gram of kgs of CO2 emitted per 100 grams of protein, right? Basis. And you can see, for example, something as simple as beef has almost like 2, 3 kgs all the way up to 30 kgs, right? And so it is not a food ingredient, but it is where you source that food ingredient from, which becomes extremely important, right? In the question, and you can have a order of magnitude difference between its impact on the environment, right, alone. And when we look at food systems, therefore, these are the three big food systems. We think they are three pillars. Largely, our focus today has been on food farms or agriculture, right? Really good for carbohydrates and fats. Probably we've, as I said, cracked the code, and we'll not be able to shift in a large way to other things. Other things can complement and get to 10-15% of the carbohydrates by looking at millets and other minor grains. But based on, I mean, that we are able to grow 4-5,000. I mean, Punjab grows about 10,000 kgs of grain per hectare, 5,000 kgs of wheat, 5,000 kgs of rice uh, in 1 year, right, from the same field in 1 hectare. Unlikely that we can replace with other minor cereals, which will have a productivity of maybe at best about 2,000, 3,000 over 2 cycles, right? So we don't have 3 times the land to be able to cover. But wherever these things grow, the wheat and rice cannot grow, right? Because intensive farming is not possible. They are largely dry, arid lands. And therefore, these provide a valuable resource in those regions, right? The other one, which is the high tech, right, is food in fermenters. I'm not talking about fermented foods. I'm talking about growing microbes and eating microbes, growing fungi, mycelia, and eating that, and even growing meat in cultures, right? Meat in fermenters. That's the high tech area of food fermenters. And the third, which interests us, is the food forest, as I say, the foraging environments, but not just the forest, also the regenerative ecosystems like the millet ecosystem. If we can retain its regenerativeness and not suddenly make it into a modern agriculture because, hey, everybody wants to eat millets, right? So this will improve the diversity in our food, because the other two food systems are actually working on reducing diversity on the plate. And therefore, we need to balance that with these foraged foods and the regenerative food. So that is one other aspect of why, right? We're talking about indigenous foods and where they are coming from, the regenerative ecosystems they come from, and how they get placed in overall in our plate. So the point I'm trying to make at every point is that this is not only this or only that. We're not trying to divide the world on food, but trying to unite it and say, how do these things complement, right, each other? Some benefits, and I think these were mentioned in the last chart as well, how the indigenous ingredients or forgotten foods bring in diversity of diet for nutrition, food security, especially in times of when there is a climate change or the threats or wars, etc. Sustainability overall, because more diverse food systems, resilient in food chain, cultural preservation, right? Which may, who knows, will help where, and then flavors, right? Diverse food species, culinary delight. I don't know if people have seen, I don't know whether my camera may not be on, I'll put it up later on as well. This book by Eating to Extinction by Dan Saladino is a very nice, interesting book to read, right? About 15-20 plants and the reasons why those. So he talks about varieties of things and not just a species per se, right? Which variety of rice, which variety of wheat, which variety of salmon, which variety of orange, etc. We have a food forest. I'll skip through this, and a number of science tools that are actually required, because when we think of indigenous ingredients and maybe forgotten foods, one thing we should remember is while what we are eating may have been because of some breeding success or technological success like green revolution, but also as we have been breeding things to reduce the toxicity of foods. Most food ingredients are not really have side effects, right? And we've been breeding out the negatives of food and building up some of the positives of food. And therefore, when we bring these back, it is really important to think of those things, right? It is not just I found a new green and let me put it on the plate. Greens can be very toxic. New pulses can be very toxic, right? It's important therefore a lot of lab work and R&D. The R of R&D is required, right? The research on the new molecules, how the partition. I'll kind of skip these interesting benefits of food that come up when you start looking at innovation, and you'll come up with these things. This kind of reduces my glycemic index by binding to some of the enzymes which are required for digestion and therefore slowing digestion and reducing my glucose bump, good for diabetes. This is improves. I can add this and improve iron uptake from vegetarian food, no, for plant-based food where iron is not absorbed, or I can focus on gut health by looking at the polyphenols in food. And so you can craft a number of, take those ideas, build the nutritional chemistry with the biology, with the environment sustainability story, and come up with a number of ideas for functional foods. I'm just giving you 2, 3 examples very quickly, 1 minute each, and then I'll end. On, say, we want to increase millets, right? And say, hey, the world should eat millets. And now, what is the design thinking that is there, right? If you start looking at millets, and we had this group I mentioned of 38 self-help group leaders, no, people who are running micro factories in villages and small towns in Orissa, working on millets. And one of the big problems they face is, hey, my millet doesn't sheet well. So I can only make a few traditional products like, say, ragi mudde in Karnataka. But people, when they buy, if I want to make it mass market and sell, they want to make a roti with it, or be able to fold it, or make cookies with it, right? And so what you have to think of, can you make, is there a technology, is there a way of making millet flour, the coarse flours of millet and maize and ragi and bajra, and make them behave like wheat flour, right? Because that's what will get people to eat, because it's very easy to roll at room temperature. You don't have to go through a hard process. It is not a brittle roti. It's a very smooth, not sandy texture. So that's something which becomes a challenge. You have to go out and look for these challenges. Don't just come back with, hey, this is consuming this. What is the challenge that people are facing when they are using ingredients, right? This is a fruit. It's a ficus species, which most people, the plants all over India, but very few people are eating it, right? Because it's a very painful fruit to eat. And by the time it becomes ripe, some squirrel has already eaten it. And so we are working on at what stage before it becomes squirrel food, before it gets spoiled, because its life is very short. How can we convert it into a food, right? So those are other ideas, that how, at what stage to pluck, how do I source it, what supply chain, and how do I convert it into stable food? This is another one. Eat more greens, right? Or eat more botanicals, right? And what we realize is that if you take greens and you want to, say, put a nice 1 cup of greens into a snack form, I can't really roll it into a dough. If I put it into a wheat dough or a millet dough, the first picture here, there are 10 pictures down there, and we are attempting to take this powder and convert it into a strip like this. It's a nice snacky strip. And what we see is, if I take wheat dough or a millet dough, I can sheet it like this. If I add 10%, that's the first one. At 20%, it's the third one. At 30%, it's the third. And you can see as I progress that my roti is beginning to break up. I am not able to sheet it. It starts becoming, separates out. And 100%, of course, it breaks completely, right? 90% breaks almost completely. So if I want to give one daily serving, I need to be able to get to the third or fourth spot, right, from the left. And I'm not able to do that without understanding the structure of my matrix that I'm going to incorporate these greens on. And when I say structure, there are things like gelatinization, dextrinization that I do need to understand. So the ingredient science becomes extremely important if you want to convert many of these things into nice foods, right? So innovation challenges, I think the 3 things to look at are, not everything traditional is good for us, right? There are allergens, toxins, antinutritional factors. So really think of those, right? Millet, for example, is very high in a anti-nutritional factor called phytic acid, which prevents uptake of iron, calcium, magnesium. So really have to think about that, right? Most pulses outside of mung, etc., have very high toxin and allergenicity, right? Uh, History of safe use, therefore, FSSAI should look at if things are available there, already there, it's easy to launch a business because you have the safety data from FSSAI backing it. Nobody can challenge you and sue you that you created a new food, some ingredient that you brought in, right? And so look at the safety aspect. Also look at the cooking and processing practices that come along with it, right? Example is when the US took soybean from soy was a traditional food in the Far East, China, beyond, right? And when the US took it, 1930s, they found, hey, wow, this is a food ingredient which is magical because 40% protein. The next best is about 20% protein. So let's bring it to America and grow it. And when they grew it, they realized that humans didn't like it. So they fed it to animals. And when they fed it to animals, the animals became unhealthy because of trypsin inhibitors and other anti-nutritional factors. It took another 40, 50 years of breeding exercise to actually breed out the toxins and the allergens from there and make it food friendly for cattle. And now another, from 1970, another 50 years to make it tasty enough for human consumption. Now the soy use is increasing, right, dramatically around the world. Because the US forgot to bring the cooking practices, right, when they brought soy to the West, right? The fermentation practices, the soaking practices, other things which went along, which made it healthy, right? And that's what we are understanding now. And third, of course, is the supply chain part, because while you may create one prototype out of it, it doesn't really translate into industry unless you know how to build a supply chain for it. So those are some things to look at as you move forward in this journey. And yeah, medicines, phytonutrients of the future are hiding in nature's treasure trove. Keep looking, and all the best for those of you who will bring in some interesting ideas to the table. It's a nice journey, inviting journey, right? Wish you all the best.